Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku carried the Chimera gene. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in the sterile, white room was thick with the cloying scent of antiseptic and shattered dreams. At 4 years old, Izuku Midoriya already understood the weight of a single, world-defining question. He sat on the crinkly paper of the examination table, his little legs dangling, swinging back and forth in a frantic rhythm that betrayed the hopeful smile plastered on his face. His all-might action figure was clutched in a white-knuckled grip, a plastic talisman against the encroaching dread. His mother, Inko, sat opposite him, her hands knotted in her lap. Her own anxiety was a palpable force in the room, a low hum of worry that Izuku could feel in his bones. Dr. Tsubasa, a man whose round glasses and grandfatherly demeanor did little to soften the blow he was about to deliver, swiveled in his chair. He tapped a stylus against the glowing screen displaying a series of X-rays and genetic charts. "Well, Mrs. Midoriya," he began, his voice laced with a practiced, gentle pity that was somehow worse than bluntness. "We've run the full panel. In terms of a quirk, I'm afraid it's not going to happen." The swinging of Izuku's legs stuttered to a halt. His plastic all-might felt suddenly heavy. "Oh," Inko whispered, a hand flying to her mouth. Are you sure? His father can breathe fire, and I can pull small objects toward me. It's just, there must be some mistake. I understand. It's a shock," the doctor said, turning the screen towards them. He pointed to a grainy image of a child's foot. "As you know, by this generation, the theory of the pinky toe joint has become a near-universal indicator. Those with quirks have evolved past the need for this vestigial joint, resulting in a single, streamlined joint structure. Izuku, as you can see here, has 2 joints. It's a throwback, a marker of the quirkless population." He said the word quirkless, like it was a terminal diagnosis. In the super-powered society they lived in, it was. Izuku dropped his action figure. It clattered to the linoleum floor, the sound echoing the sudden, cavernous emptiness that had opened in his chest. Inko began to apologize, tears already welling in her eyes, but the doctor held up a hand. "However," he said, a note of genuine academic curiosity entering his voice for the first time, "there is something unusual. It's why we ran the deeper genetic sequencing." He swiped the screen, and a complex double helix populated by thousands of tiny markers appeared. He zoomed in on one specific chromosome, highlighting a segment that glowed a faint amber. "We found this," he explained. "It's an extremely rare genetic anomaly. We call it the Chimera factor in research circles. It's not a quirk, let me be very clear about that. It grants no powers, no controllable abilities. It's more of a collection of dormant, heterogeneous phenotype expressions. A genetic scrapbook, if you will." Inko stared, uncomprehending. "A scrapbook? Essentially, yes. In a quirkless individual like Izuku, it's functionally useless. It might manifest in subtle, non-superhuman ways, slightly denser bone and muscle structure than average, heightened baseline senses, perhaps minor cosmetic mutations. Things that could easily be written off as being a little different. The doctor leaned forward, his professional curiosity overriding his bedside manner. "Frankly, from a medical standpoint, your son is fascinating. This gene is usually suppressed or overwritten entirely by a dominant quirk factor. To see it so clearly on a quirkless baseline, it's a 1 in a million case." The doctor's excitement was a discordant note in the symphony of their despair. He saw a research paper. Inko saw another reason for her son to be ostracized. She looked at Izuku, who was now staring at his own hands as if they belonged to a stranger. She thought of the little things she'd dismissed. The way his ears were just a little too pointed at the tips, something she'd always found cute. The way he'd complain about loud noises that no one else seemed to notice. The strange, intense focus in his bright green eyes when he was watching something, a look that felt ancient, predatory. "Is it dangerous?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Oh no, not at all," Dr. Tsubasa said dismissively, already losing interest now that the medical novelty had been explained. "As I said, it's dormant. Useless. He's a perfectly healthy, if unfortunately quirkless, little boy." The rest of the appointment was a blur. The drive home was silent. That night, after hours of watching the same All Might debut video over and over, Izuku turned from the computer, his face streaked with tears, his body trembling, and pointed a shaky finger at the screen. "Mom!" he wavered, his voice a fragile thread. "He saves everyone with a smile, no matter what trouble they're in. He's such a cool hero." He turned his chair, and the look in his eyes shattered her heart. They were wide, desperate, and held that strange, wild light the doctor had inadvertently named. Can I be a hero too?" Inko rushed forward, wrapping him in a hug, her own sobs racking her body. "I'm sorry, Izuku!" she cried, clutching him. "I'm so sorry!" It was the wrong answer. And in that moment, a quiet, stubborn spark ignited within the boy's chest, nestled right beside the useless, sleeping beast in his jeans. 10 years later, the world, for Izuku Midoriya, was a cacophony. It wasn't a world of vibrant superpowers and heroic clashes, not for him. It was a world of overwhelming sensory input, a constant, low-level assault that he'd learned to filter, file, and ignore just to stay sane. His alarm didn't wake him that morning. The gentle shift in air pressure from a low front moving in 60 miles away did. It was a subtle change, a promise of rain in the late afternoon that he could feel in his sinuses and smell on the wind, a scent of damp earth and ozone that cut through the city smog. As his eyes opened, he was already processing the sounds of the apartment complex, the groaning pipes of Mrs. Watanabe's shower 2 floors down, the frantic scratching of a mouse in the wall behind his bed, the unique flutter thump of a pigeon's wings as it landed on his windowsill. He pushed himself out of bed, his fluffy green-black hair a tangled mess. He padded to his closet, deliberately keeping his feet flat. If he wasn't careful, especially in the morning, the skin on his soles had a tendency to become faintly tacky, a bizarre trait that once caused him to walk halfway up a doorframe in his sleep when he was 7. He pulled on his black Gakurin uniform, taking a moment to tug his hair down over his ears. It was a nervous, subconscious habit. While not elfin, the tips were noticeably pointed, a clear deviation from the human norm. They were also incredibly sensitive, twitching involuntarily at high-frequency sounds, a dead giveaway of his strangeness. "Izuku! Breakfast!" his mother called from the kitchen. Her voice was a warm, comforting anchor in the daily sensory storm. He followed the scent of toasted bread and miso soup, his stomach growling. As he sat, his mother placed a bowl in front of him, her smile a little strained, the way it always was. She loved him more than anything, but she saw the same things everyone else did, even if she refused to name them. She saw the way his eyes tracked the fly buzzing near the ceiling with an unnerving precision, the way he'd sometimes cock his head at a sound she couldn't hear, the way his knuckles were just a bit too bony, his nails just a bit too thick. "Don't forget your umbrella today," she said, gesturing to the clear blue sky outside. "It won't rain until after 3. Izuku replied without thinking, then immediately flinched. Inko just nodded, her smile tightening. "Okay, dear. Have a good day at school." Aldera Junior High. If his home was a managed storm, school was an uncontrolled hurricane. "All right, you third years," the teacher droned, flinging a stack of papers into the air. "It's time to start thinking seriously about your futures. I'd hand out these career aptitude tests, but why bother?" He swept his arms wide, a manic grin on his face. "I know you all want to go to the hero track." The classroom erupted. Students showed off their minor quirks, stretching fingers, conjuring small objects, hardening skin. It was a chaotic display of mediocre power, but it was power. Izuku just sank lower in his seat, trying to become invisible. Yes, you've all got some impressive quirks," the teacher said, placating the class. "But no using quirks in school." A familiar, arrogant voice cut through the noise like shattering glass. "Teach, don't lump me in with this bunch of losers." Katsuki Bakugo. He was leaning back in his chair, feet propped on his desk, the picture of casual contempt. "I'm the real deal. These extras will be lucky to end up as sidekicks to some busted D-lister. I'm aiming for the top. I'm going for UA." The class exploded again, this time in whispers of awe and disbelief. UA High, the #1 hero school in the country. "I aced the mock exam," Bakugo boasted, pointing a thumb at his chest. I'm the only one at this shitty school who has a chance. I'll end up more famous than All Might himself and become the richest hero of all time." The teacher shuffled through his papers. "Oh, that's right. Midoriya, you wanted to go to UA too, didn't you?" The world stopped. A pin-drop silence fell over the room, heavy and suffocating. Then it broke, replaced by a wave of cruel, incredulous laughter. "Midoriya? No way! Good grades alone can't get you into the hero program. He's quirkless. He wouldn't last 2 seconds." Izuku's face burned with a heat that had nothing to do with superpowers. He felt dozens of eyes on him, dissecting him. Crack boom, an explosion sent him flying from his chair. He landed hard against the back wall, the wind knocked out of him. Bakugo stood over his desk, a palm smoking, a snarl twisting his features. The air filled with the sharp, sweet acrid smell of nitroglycerin, a scent Izuku associated with pain and humiliation. "Forget the extras, Kaken," Izuku stammered, scrambling to his feet. "I am not trying to compete with you. I swear, it's been my dream since I was a kid, and, well, there's no harm in trying, right?" Bakugo's crimson eyes narrowed. "Trying? Are you taking the test just for fun? What can you even do?" His gaze swept over Izuku with utter disdain, lingering for a moment on his hair-covered ears. "You're less than nothing. You're a freak of nature, a mistake. A stray mutt that doesn't even know its own place. Asterisk stray. Mutt. Asterisk the names had stuck since elementary school. They started after Izuku had located a lost cat by claiming he could hear it crying in the walls, or when he'd flinched away from Bakugo's firecracker-like explosions before they even went off. His oddities, his unexplainable senses, marked him as something other. Something to be kicked. The rest of the day was a blur of whispered insults and sharp-shouldered shoves in the hallway. Izuku kept his head down, his focus turned inward, scribbling furiously in his notebook. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. It was his sanctuary, a place where he could deconstruct the powers he so desperately wanted, analyzing, strategizing, understanding. As the final bell rang, he packed his bag, eager to escape. But as he reached for his notebook, it was snatched from his grasp. "We're not done here, Deku!" Bakugo growled, holding the book. His 2 cronies flanked him, smirking. "Still at it, huh?" One of them sneered, reading the cover. "Hero Analysis for the Future? Seriously? It's none of your business! Give it back!" Izuku squeaked, reaching for it. Bakugo simply held it between his palms. Kaboom! A small, sharp explosion. The book, scorched and smoking, was casually tossed out the open window. Izuku let out a choked cry. The best heroes showed greatness even as students. "I'll be the first and only hero from this worthless school," Bakugo said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. He placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, the heat from his palm radiating through the fabric of his uniform. Smoke began to curl from the cloth. "So here's a little advice, nerd. Don't even think of applying to UA." He turned to leave, then paused at the door, a final, venomous thought occurring to him. "You know, if you want a quirk so bad, there might be a way. Just take a swan dive off the roof of the building and pray you'll be born with one in your next life." The words hung in the air, cold and sharp. For a moment, Izuku's hypersensitive hearing went completely silent. The world narrowed to the sight of Bakugo's retreating back. A spark of something hot and furious, something deeper than just anger, flared in his chest. It was a primal, territorial rage. An instinct that screamed threat. He took a half step forward, his hands curling into fists, his nails digging into his palms. Then, just as quickly, the feeling was gone, replaced by the familiar, crushing weight of his own powerlessness. He was just Deku. The useless, quirkless anomaly. He retrieved his burnt, waterlogged notebook from the koi pond outside, the smell of wet, charred paper filling his nostrils. The ink had bled, his meticulous notes turned into abstract, blurry shapes, a metaphor for his life. He walked home, taking the long way, the underpass a cool, dark respite from the sun. He could smell the stagnant water and the damp concrete. And something else. Something foul and chemical, like an open sewer mixed with cheap cologne. His ears picked up a wet, squelching sound from the tunnel behind him, A sound that didn't belong. He turned. A massive, amorphous creature made of green sludge was pouring out of a manhole cover, two huge, manic eyes bobbing in the morass. A medium-sized invisibility cloak. The villain gurgled, its voice like mud bubbling. Before Izuku could even process the thought to run, the sludge was on him. It was a disgusting, suffocating torrent, forcing its way into his mouth and nose. It was thick, viscous, and tasted of filth. He couldn't breathe. His limbs were pinned. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. His lungs burned. He clawed at the sludge, his fingers finding no purchase. His vision began to tunnel, black spots dancing at the edges. I'm dying, he thought, a strange calm washing over the terror. Asterisk, is this it? Is this how it ends? Asterisk. Have no fear! For I am here! A thunderous voice ripped through the underpass. The manhole cover shot into the air like a cannonball. And there he was. All Might. Larger than life, his signature smile a beacon in the gloom. Texas! Smash! The words were a physical force. A hurricane of pressurized air blasted through the tunnel. To Izuku, it was a sensory cataclysm. The sound was a physical blow that made his sensitive ears ring with agony. The wind pressure ripped the sludge villain from his body, splattering it against the concrete walls. Izuku gasped, collapsing to the ground, taking in huge, ragged breaths of sweet, clean air. His world was a swirl of pain and relief. When he came to, a rapid, gentle tapping on his cheek brought him back to full consciousness. He looked up into the smiling face of his idol. Ah, good! Thought we lost you there. All Might boomed, his voice somehow both deafening and reassuring. He was already screwing the caps onto soda bottles, the villain now safely contained. Well, you were a big help. Thank you. I've captured the evildoer. Izuku's mind, reeling from the near-death experience, scrambled for his notebook. He needed an autograph. It was a reflex born of a lifetime of hero worship. He fumbled through his bag, finding the charred book. He opened it, and there it was, a bold, sprawling signature covering 2 whole pages. He already did it! Izuku bowed frantically. Thank you so much! It'll be a family heirloom, of course. Well, I've got to get this guy to the police, All Might said, giving the bottles a pat. Stay safe, citizen. He crouched, muscles coiling. Pros are always fighting time and villains. Wait. No. There was so much he had to ask. This was his one chance. The question that had been burning in his soul for a decade. As All Might launched himself into the air, a desperate, instinctual impulse took over. Izuku leaped and grabbed onto his leg. The flight was terrifying. The wind whipped at him, threatening to tear him from his perch. Hey, what do you think you're doing? All Might yelled, trying to pry him off. If I let go, I'll die. Izuku screamed back, his voice hoarse. Oh. Right. They landed roughly on the roof of a nearby department store. Izuku's legs trembled, both from fear and adrenaline. That was very reckless. All Might chided, his hand on his hip. Now, I really must be going. Wait. Izuku cried out. I have to know. He squeezed his eyes shut. Is it possible to become a hero, even if I don't have a quirk? The question hung in the air, fragile and desperate. Can someone who's quirkless be like you? He looked up, expecting an answer. But the man he was speaking to was gone. In his place stood a skeletal, emaciated figure, steam pouring from his body like a kettle. Izuku stared, his mouth agape, as the man coughed, a trickle of blood dribbling from the corner of his mouth. The number one hero, the symbol of peace, had deflated. What followed was a story of a grievous injury, a 5-year-old battle that had cost All Might his stomach and much of his respiratory system. He could only be a hero for about 3 hours a day. The ever-present smile was a mask to hide the fear and the pain. So no. I don't think you can be a hero without a quirk, All Might said, his voice quiet but firm. He lifted his shirt to show a horrific, swirling scar that covered half his torso. Pro heroes are always putting their lives on the line. I can't simply say, you can be a hero even without power. The words were nails in the coffin of his dream. Izuku's world, which had been teetering on a knife's edge of hope, came crashing down. His entire body slumped. The light in his eyes, that strange, wild flicker, dimmed until it was barely an ember. His posture changed. He wasn't just a disappointed fan anymore. He was a cornered animal, wounded and finally accepting its fate. All Might saw the shift. For a seasoned hero who had faced down every kind of villain, this look was uniquely unsettling. It wasn't the look of simple despair. It was the look of a fundamental, biological surrender. It pricked at his conscience, a small, sharp point of unease he couldn't quite name. "It's not bad to have a dream, young man," All Might said, his voice softening with a trace of guilt. "Just make sure it's realistic." He turned and walked to the rooftop door, leaving Izuku alone with the wind and the ruins of his life. Izuku didn't know how long he stood there. The city sounds, usually a cacophony, were a dull, muted roar. His heightened senses seemed to have turned off, shielding him from the world. He numbly made his way down the stairs and out onto the street. Then, a new sound cut through the fog. An explosion. A crowd had gathered. He smelled smoke, burnt sugar, and sludge. The same foul scent from the underpass. He pushed his way to the front. It was him. The sludge villain. All Might must have dropped the bottles during their impromptu flight. And he had a hostage. A boy with spiky, ash-blonde hair, thrashing, setting off explosions that did more to endanger the surroundings than free himself. Bakugo. The heroes were there. Kamui Woods, Death Arms, Empty Lady. But they were useless. The villain's body was fluid. There was no good angle for an attack, and the hostage's own volatile quirk made getting close a death sentence. Izuku's mind, a finely honed machine of analysis, kicked into overdrive despite his despair. The villain's body is fluid, but his eyes are solid. That's a weak point. Bakugo's explosions are powerful but indiscriminate. He's suffocating. The heroes are waiting for someone with the right quirk. But there's no time. He saw Bakugo's eyes. They were wide with terror and rage, pleading for help. And in that instant, everything else fell away. The doctor's diagnosis. The years of bullying. The rooftop speech. All of it was burned away by a single, white-hot, primal instinct. He needs to be saved. His legs moved before his brain gave the command. He wasn't running. He was pouncing. He burst past the police barricade, a green blur of motion. "You idiot! Stop!" Death Arms yelled, but Izuku couldn't stop. It was a compulsion, a biological imperative that screamed at him to protect another from a predator. His school bag, heavy with books, felt like a natural extension of his arm. He swung it, hurling it with a surprising force at the villain's face. It struck a solid eye with a wet smack, causing the villain to roar in pain. The momentary distraction was enough. Bakugo could gasp a breath of air. Izuku didn't stop. He ran forward, his feet finding purchase on the churning sludge. He reached the center of the vortex and began to dig, his fingers clawing at the viscous filth covering Bakugo's face. His nails, always a little too thick, a little too hard, scraped against the sludge, tearing small channels in the muck. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Kaken!" he screamed. "What the hell are you doing here, Deku?" Bakugo choked out, his eyes wild. "I don't know!" Izuku cried, tears streaming down his face. "My legs just started moving. You looked like you needed saving." It was the truth. It was the only truth that mattered. In that moment, he wasn't the quirkless, useless Deku. He was a creature acting on its most fundamental, heroic instinct. The villain recovered, raising a slimy tendril to crush him. "You're done, kid!" But then, a massive hand grabbed Izuku's arm, pulling him back. All Might stood between them, his muscular form returned. "I really am pathetic," All Might said, blood trickling from his mouth even in his hero form. He looked at Izuku, and his eyes held a newfound respect. "I told you the traits of a great hero, but I wasn't living up to my own ideals. Pros are always risking their lives." He grabbed the villain's arm, planting his feet. "Detroit." Smash! The punch was world-breaking. The sheer force of the wind it generated was biblical. It didn't just scatter the villain, it changed the weather, the concussive blast forming clouds that began to drizzle rain. The rain he had sensed that morning. In the aftermath, Izuku was ferociously scolded by the pro-heroes for his recklessness, while Bakugo was praised for his bravery. The world snapped back into its usual, unfair configuration. He trudged home, the adrenaline fading, leaving only the hollow ache of his own inadequacy. DKU! He turned. Bakugo was running to catch up to him, his face a mask of fury and shame. I never asked for your help. And you didn't help me. Got it? He yelled, his voice cracking. I was fine by myself. You're a quirkless failure playing hero. Don't you ever forget it. He turned and stormed off, leaving Izuku alone once more. It was the final twist of the knife. He was a failure. He had only gotten in the way. I am here! The booming voice made him jump. All Might, in his hero form, skidded to a halt in front of him. All Might? What are you doing here? Weren't you swarmed by reporters? Getting away from them was a piece of cake. For I am all am. He suddenly deflated in a puff of steam, collapsing into his skeletal form and coughing up a worrying amount of blood. Young man, he said, wiping his chin. I came to thank you. And to revise what I said earlier. Izuku stared confused. You told me you were quirkless. All Might continued, his gaze intense. And on that rooftop, when I crushed your dream, I saw you. I saw your spirit just give out. But then, moments later, at the scene of the crime, you, a timid, quirkless boy, were the first one to act. You moved before anyone else. He took a step closer. All the great heroes have stories about them from their school days. Most of their stories have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. All Might look down at Izuku, and for the first time, someone saw past the quirkless label, past the anomaly. They saw the core of him. That's what happened to you back there, wasn't it? Tears welled in Izuku's eyes. He clutched his chest, the memory of that primal, uncontrollable urge to save someone washing over him. He nodded, unable to speak. All Might smiled. It wasn't his broad, camera-ready smile. It was something smaller, more genuine, and infinitely more powerful. Young man, he said, his voice ringing with a conviction that resonated in Izuku's very soul, a conviction that reached past the years of doubt and found the stubborn, heroic spark within. You too can become a hero. Izuku Midoriya fell to his knees and wept. Not with sorrow, but with the overwhelming, cataclysmic force of a dream, once dead and buried, being resurrected. He didn't know it yet, but this was more than just an offer of training. It was the striking of a match, poised to ignite the dormant, chaotic beast sleeping in his blood. The world had dissolved into a blurry watercolor painting of streetlights and sodium lamps, all seen through the thick, distorting lens of tears. Izuku Midoriya was on his knees on a cracked sidewalk, the rough concrete biting into his uniform trousers, but he felt nothing. The only sensation was the thunderous, impossible echo of All Might's words in his soul. You too can become a hero. It was a key turning a lock that had been rusted shut for a decade. The relief was so immense, so all-consuming, that it was physically painful. A dam of grief, frustration, and desperate, stubborn hope burst within him, and he wept with the force of a lifetime of repressed emotion. All Might, now in his skeletal form, stood over him, a gaunt and silent sentinel. He let the boy cry. He understood that this was a necessary catharsis, a purging of the poison of despair that had saturated the young man's life. When the racking sobs finally subsided into shuddering gasps, All Might knelt, his own joints creaking in protest. Feel better? He asked, his voice gentle. Izuku nodded, wiping his face with the back of a gritty hand. Why yes. I'm sorry, don't be. All Might said, his expression serious. You earned that. Now stand up, young Midoriya. The path from this moment forward will not be an easy one, and it begins with you getting back on your feet. Izuku pushed himself up, his legs trembling but holding. He looked at his idol, the #1 hero in the world, who now looked like a man who might be blown away by a strong gust of wind. The dissonance was staggering. What did you mean? Izuku asked, his voice hoarse. How can I? All Might's gaze was sharp, cutting through the twilight gloom. I have been searching for a successor. Someone worthy to inherit my power. Izuku's mind blanked. Inherit power? It sounded like something out of a fantasy novel, not the science-based reality of quirks. Inherit? But a quirk is a biological trait. It can't be passed on like a piece of furniture. Mine can. All Might stated, the simple declaration holding an impossible weight. He looked around the empty street, then leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. My quirk is called One for All. The name seemed to hum in the air between them. It is a sacred torch, passed from one generation to the next. It is the crystallization of power. One person cultivates that power, then passes it on to another. The new wielder integrates it with their own strength, cultivates it further, and continues the cycle. It is the sworn duty of those who hold this power to fight evil, to stand as a symbol of peace. Izuku's analytical mind, his greatest and only tool, word to life. A transferable quirk. A quirk that stockpiles power. It explained All Might's impossible strength, a level of power that defied all known quirk science. It was an anomaly, just like, I was given this power. All Might continued, looking at his own skeletal hands. And I have been searching for someone with a truly heroic heart to be the next wielder, someone who moves to save others not for fame or fortune, but because it is the right thing to do. Today, when your quirkless legs carried you into danger to save that boy, I found him. He looked directly at Izuku, his pale blue eyes piercing. I want to give you my power, young Midoriya. Izuku felt the world tilt on its axis. Him? The useless, quirkless Deku? The stray mutt? The boy whose only notable feature was a dormant, medically fascinating genetic flaw. It was too much. It was a joke. It was a dream. You're offering me your quirk? He stammered, the words feeling alien in his mouth. Yes. But it is your choice to accept. This is not a gift, it is a burden. It is a lifetime of struggle and sacrifice. So I ask you, Izuku Midoriya, do you accept this power, and the responsibility that comes with it? There was no hesitation. The spark that had been kindled by All Might's earlier words now roared into a bonfire of pure, unadulterated determination. This was it. This was the miracle he had begged the universe for every single night of his life. Yes, Izuku said, his voice ringing with a firmness that surprised even himself. Yes, I accept. A genuine, warm smile spread across Toshinori Yagi's face. I had a feeling you would. Good. Then your training begins at dawn. Dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of soft pink and brilliant orange. It was a beautiful, hopeful morning. The location of Izuku's training, however, was anything but. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park had once been a scenic coastal area. Now, it was a testament to years of illegal dumping. A mountain range of rusted appliances, broken furniture, tangled fishing nets, and discarded technology choked the shoreline, spilling into the water. The sea breeze did little to cover the stench of rust, decay, and stagnant seawater. It was an eyesore, a blight on the city. Izuku stood before it, his new workout clothes feeling stiff and foreign. He looked at the mountain of trash, then at the skeletal man standing beside him. This is the gym? He asked, bewildered. This is your crucible. All Might corrected, his tone grim. He gestured to the junkyard. Heroism in the modern age has become glorified. Glossy, camera-ready careers, but true heroism, at its core, is about service. It's about cleaning up society's messes, both literal and figurative. You will restore this entire coastline. This will be your first act of community service as a hero in training. Izuku's jaw dropped. The sheer scale of the task was astronomical. It would take an entire fleet of industrial machines months to clear this. But why? Izuku asked. You said you were going to give me your quirk, and I will. All Might confirmed. But right now, your body is an unsuitable vessel. One for All is a raging torrent of pure energy. If you were to inherit it now, your limbs would pop right off your body. He made a small exploding motion with his hands that was deeply unsettling. Your body needs to be strong enough to contain the storm. We have 10 months until the UA entrance exam. In 10 months, you will turn your frail body into a fortified vessel. He pulled a sheaf of papers from a folder. To that end, I have created this, my custom American Dream Plan. It's a complete lifestyle guide, from your sleep schedule to your diet, and of course, your workout regimen. Follow it to the letter, and you will be ready. Izuku took the papers. They were covered in meticulous, almost manic detail. Caloric intake charts, sleep cycle diagrams, and a workout plan that looked like it was designed for a professional strongman. It was impossible. It was perfect. His analytical mind latched onto the logic, the structure. It was a mountain, yes, but this was the map to climb it. Now then, All Might said, pointing to a particularly large, decrepit refrigerator half buried in the sand. Let's start with that. The first few hours were a brutal awakening. Izuku, despite being book-smart, was physically at the bottom of the barrel. He tied a thick rope around the fridge, dug his heels into the sand, and pulled. Nothing. The fridge didn't budge. He pulled again, his muscles screaming, his face turning a deep crimson. The rope bit into his hands, and the metal monstrosity shifted a single, agonizing inch. He spent the next hour just trying to drag it 10 feet. He fell, he got back up, his body trembling with exhaustion. The sun climbed higher, beating down on him. All Might stood by, offering sharp critiques but no physical help. Your form is all wrong. Use your legs, not your back. Breathe, boy. Don't hold your breath or you'll pass out. More. I know you have more in you. Finally, Izuku collapsed, his limbs giving out completely. He lay face down in the sand, his lungs burning, his body a single, unified ache. He had never felt so weak. That's enough for the first day, All Might said, his voice surprisingly gentle. He was checking a stopwatch. Not bad. You lasted longer than I anticipated. Longer than anticipated? Izuku pushed himself onto his elbows, his vision swimming. All Might was scribbling in a notebook of his own. Asterisk subject, Midoriya Izuku. Baseline test. Quirkless. Heart rate peaked at 195 bpm. Recovery to 120 bpm in 90 seconds. Standard recovery is 120 to 150 seconds. Muscle fatigue onset approximately 12% slower than projected for his body mass and exertion level. Pain tolerance appears abnormally high. Initial conclusion: boy possesses extraordinary willpower. Secondary note: monitor physiological discrepancies. The Chimera factor from his medical file is a wild card. Asterisk. To Izuku, he simply said, "Go home. Eat. Sleep. Be back here at 5 a.m. tomorrow." And so it began. The 10 months of hell. The days bled into a grueling routine. Wake before dawn, run to the beach, train until his body screamed, stumble to school in a daze, stumble home, study the American dream plan, collapse into bed. His world shrank to the smell of salt and rust, the burn in his muscles, and All Might's demanding voice. The first 3 months were pure, unadulterated misery. He hit a wall. His progress stalled. His body, pushed past its limits every single day, was beginning to break down. He was perpetually covered in scrapes, bruises, and bandages. One evening, Inko Midoriya watched her son limp into the apartment, his face pale with exhaustion, a dark purple bruise blooming on his forearm where a piece of scrap metal had fallen. He barely touched his katsudon, his favorite meal, before excusing himself to study. Later, she found him asleep at his desk, his head resting on the open pages of All Might's training plan. His hands were raw and calloused, and he was muttering in his sleep, his brow furrowed in effort. Her heart ached. She knew he was training for Yue, but this was something else. This was self-flagellation. She gently cleaned a cut on his cheek, her touch light as a feather. "Oh, Izuku," she whispered, tears welling. "You're trying so hard. But you're going to destroy yourself." Izuku, in his sleep, flinched. His ear, the one she could see, twitched at the sound of her whisper. A low, almost inaudible noise rumbled in his chest, a sound like a sleeping dog's growl, before he settled again. Inko froze, her blood running cold. It was that sound again, the one she'd heard a few times when he was a child, a strange, guttural noise that didn't belong to her sweet boy. She quickly backed out of the room, her heart pounding with a nameless fear. But Izuku did not break. The next morning, he was back at the beach, his eyes burning with a renewed fire. All Might saw the shift. The boy had pushed through the wall of pain and found a new reserve of strength. By the 6th month, the results were undeniable. A massive swathe of the beach was clear, revealing clean sand for the first time in years. Izuku's body had transformed. The soft, undefined lines of his youth had been carved away, replaced by lean, hard muscle. He could now haul 2 washing machines at once, his movements economical and powerful. One afternoon, as he was hauling a tangled mess of steel rebar, an elderly man who lived nearby approached him. "Young man," he said, his voice creaky, "I've been watching you. Every single day, you've done a wonderful thing here." "Thank you." Izuku, covered in sweat and grime, could only stare, dumbfounded. The man's simple, heartfelt thanks hit him with more force than any of All Might's critiques. He wasn't just building his body, he was already helping people. He was already being a hero. The final months were a blur of frenzied activity. All Might, seeing the exam date looming, pushed him harder than ever. The tasks became monumental. Izuku was now pulling a stripped-down truck chassis, the tires digging deep ruts in the sand. During one particularly grueling session, Izuku was straining to move the chassis, his every muscle locked in a state of screaming tension. His face was contorted in a mask of pure effort, his teeth gritted. A sound escaped his lips, not a yell of exertion, but a deep, thoracic growl, a sound of pure animalistic struggle. All Might, observing from a distance, felt a flicker of that same unease he'd felt on the rooftop. It was the look of a wolf trying to tear its own leg out of a trap. It was primal, terrifying, and utterly indomitable. The boy wasn't just training his body, he was honing some deep, dormant predator's will to survive, to overcome. His adaptation rate is off the charts, All Might mused, reviewing his notes. It's beyond just willpower. His physiology is actively rewriting itself to meet the demand. Bone density, muscle fiber recruitment. It's like his body knows how to become stronger on a cellular level. That Chimera gene, it's not as dormant as that doctor thought. Finally, the day arrived. The morning of the UA entrance exam. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon as Izuku stood atop the final, towering pile of garbage. The entire beach was pristine. The sand was clean, the water was clear, and the sun reflected off the gentle waves. He had done it. He threw his head back and let out a raw, triumphant roar that echoed across the restored coastline. It wasn't the squeak of the boy he had been. It was the cry of a young man who had conquered a mountain with his bare hands. Suddenly, a figure landed beside him. It was All Might, but not the skeletal Tashinori. It was the full, towering, muscle-bound symbol of peace, his smile as bright as the morning sun. "Izuku, my boy!" he boomed, his voice filled with an immense, overflowing pride. He held up his phone, showing a picture of Izuku from 10 months ago, a scrawny, tear-streaked kid. Then he gestured to the powerful young man standing before him now. "Look at you! You did it! You're a true vessel now!" Izuku's eyes welled with tears, but these were tears of joy. "All Might! I did it! You did!" All Might said, his smile softening. He then plucked a single hair from his signature blonde bangs. He held it out to Izuku. "Now for your reward." Izuku stared at the hair, then at All Might, his expression one of utter confusion. "My power is passed on through the consumption of my DNA," All Might explained, his tone matter-of-fact. "Now." He shoved the hair towards Izuku's face, a manic grin spreading across his own. "Eat this, huh?" Izuku recoiled. This was how the sacred torch was passed. After 10 months of blood, sweat, and tears, the final, profound moment of inheritance was this? It was absurd. It was anticlimactic. It was All Might. "You've got no time! The exam is in 3 hours! You have to absorb it now!" All Might insisted. With a deep sense of a surreal, life-altering absurdity, Izuku took the single strand of hair. He held it for a moment, the physical manifestation of his dream. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and swallowed it. For a second, there was nothing. An empty, silent beat. Izuku opened his eyes, looking at his hands. He felt the same. Tired, sore, but fundamentally unchanged. "Did it work?" he asked, a hint of panic in his voice. And then the world ended. It started not as a feeling, but as a sound, a high-frequency shriek inside his skull that drowned out the roar of the ocean. It was the sound of a trillion cicadas screaming in unison. His already heightened senses, honed by his chimera genetics, were thrown into catastrophic overdrive. The gentle morning light became a blinding, solar flare. The smell of the salt in the air was a corrosive, chemical burn in his nostrils. The feeling of his clothes on his skin was like being scrubbed with steel wool. A jolt, white-hot and absolute, shot through his body. It was like being struck by lightning from the inside out. One for all wasn't settling in. It was a foreign invader, a cosmic entity forcing its way into a mortal shell, and every cell in his body was screaming in protest. He dropped to his knees with a choked cry, his hands flying to his head as if he could physically stop the sensory assault. "Young Midoriya?" All Might yelled, his smile vanishing, replaced by alarm. The power, the raging torrent of energy, surged through his veins, searching for purchase. And it found something. It found the dormant code, the genetic scrapbook, the sleeping beast he carried in his DNA. The chimera factor. One for all was the catalyst. It was a flash flood breaking 100-year-old dam. The dormant genes, the heterogeneous phenotype expressions, didn't just wake up. They were violently supercharged, activated all at once in a chaotic, biological explosion. Izuku's body began to convulse, his back arching as he was slammed to the ground. His skin felt like it was on fire, his internal temperature skyrocketing. A low, guttural noise ripped from his throat, a sound that was not human. From All Might's horrified perspective, he was watching his successor die. The boy was spasming on the sand, his body contorting unnaturally. Then, the changes began. The pupils of Izuku's wide, terrified green eyes dilated until they consumed the iris, and then the entire sclera, before flaring with a brilliant, toxic green light. His jaw clenched, and for a horrifying, split second, his teeth seemed to shift, his canines elongating into sharp, predatory points. Greyasayag! The sound that tore from Izuku's throat was a bestial, agonized roar of a creature being born and torn apart at the same time. It was a sound of pure, primal rage and pain. It was the sound of the beast, awakened and fighting against the cage of his flesh. What have I done? All Might thought, frozen in horror. His body, it's not just rejecting the power, it's changing. Did I kill him? For Izuku, the world was a red-tinged haze of pain and instinct. He felt a loss of self, his consciousness being drowned by a tidal wave of primal urges. Threat. Fight. Flee. Hunt. His own mind was a tiny, terrified ship in a hurricane of animalistic fury. He felt his face twisting, his teeth sharpening, a growl building in his chest that was not his. He was losing himself, and then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. His body, unable to handle the catastrophic system overload, did the only thing it could. It shut down. Izuku's eyes rolled back in his head, the terrifying green light vanished, and he went limp, collapsing into unconsciousness on the sand. Silence. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. All Might stared at the still, small form of his successor, his heart pounding in his throat. He rushed forward, dropping to his knees and pressing two trembling fingers against the boy's neck. A pulse. Faint, but steady. He wasn't dead. All Might let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, the relief so profound it nearly buckled him. He gently turned Izuku over. There were no visible changes. The glowing eyes were gone, the teeth were normal. He just looked like a boy who had fainted from exhaustion. But All Might had seen it. He had heard it. That was not a normal reaction. Hours passed. All Might sat vigil, his muscular form long since deflated, leaving a worried, skeletal man watching over a sleeping boy. The sun climbed high into the sky. The exam would have started by now. Finally, Izuku's eyelids fluttered. He groaned, a hand going to his head. Ugh, what happened? He sat up, his movements slow and sluggish. He looked at his hands, then at his surroundings. He looked at the worried face of Toshinori Yagi. The exam, he whispered, his eyes widening in panic. I missed it. Easy, my boy, easy, All Might said, his voice strained. The exam is the least of our worries right now. How do you feel? Izuku took a moment for a self-assessment. His head throbbed, and his body ached, but it was a familiar ache from his training. But there was something else. Something new. It was a low, constant thrum of energy under his skin, like a high-voltage power line had been buried deep within his flesh. And there was a hum, a faint, high-frequency tone at the edge of his hearing that hadn't been there before. The world felt sharper, more defined. He could feel the slight vibration in the ground from a truck passing on the road a quarter-mile away. I feel. He started, then trailed off. Different. There's a buzz. Inside me. All Might's face was grim. Tell me, young Midoriya. Your medical file. You were diagnosed as quirkless, but was there anything else? Anything at all, no matter how insignificant? Izuku frowned, trying to recall the hazy memory of that doctor's office. The doctor, he said I was quirkless, but there was something else. A genetic marker. He called it a chimera factor, said it was rare, but useless. Dormant. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity in All Might's mind. Dormant. Useless. Not a quirk. But a biological wildcard. He hadn't just given one for all to a quirkless boy. He had poured a universe of power into a vessel containing an unknown, volatile element. He hadn't been filling an empty cup. He'd been pouring gasoline onto a mysterious, hidden ember. I see. All Might said, his voice heavy with a dread he couldn't hide. I believe One for All's energy acted as a catalyst. It didn't just settle into you. It forcibly activated that dormant gene. Izuku stared at him, the implications slowly dawning. The growl. The feeling of his face changing. The loss of control. It hadn't been a hallucination. What does that mean? Izuku asked, his voice trembling. All Might looked at his successor, the boy he had chosen, the boy whose life he had just irrevocably and dangerously complicated. The path to heroism was supposed to be hard, but this was a variable he had never encountered, a beast he had no idea how to tame. It means, All Might said slowly, that your struggle will not just be to control One for All. You now have to master a part of yourself that, until today, you never even knew existed. He looked towards the distant silhouette of Yue Hai. And you have no training for either. The days following the inheritance were a period of tense, anxious quiet. The world, for Izuku, had been permanently altered. The low, buzzing thrum of One for All was a constant companion, a subterranean river of power flowing just beneath the surface of his awareness. It made his hair stand on end and sent phantom shivers down his spine. The enhanced sensory input, once a manageable quirk of his chimera genetics, was now amplified to an almost unbearable degree. He could hear conversations from 3 apartments away, smell the faintest trace of perfume on a person who'd walked past his door 5 minutes ago, and see the individual dust motes dancing in a sunbeam with crystalline clarity. He spent most of his time in his room with the curtains drawn, trying to relearn how to filter a world that was suddenly screaming at him. He had missed the first UA entrance exam. The disappointment was a sharp, bitter pill, but it was overshadowed by a deeper, more profound anxiety. What was he now? He had the power he'd always dreamed of, but it was tangled up with something wild and terrifying. The memory of the convulsion on the beach, the feeling of his own body twisting into something not human, was a waking nightmare. A week after the incident, an official-looking envelope arrived. It was from Yue Hai. His heart hammered against his ribs. He'd been so sure he'd missed his chance entirely. With trembling hands he opened it. A small metal disc fell onto his desk, and a holographic projection flickered to life. It was All Might, in his hero form. I am here. A projection, he boomed. He explained that due to the unusual circumstances of Izuku's sudden illness, and a personal recommendation from a certain someone, he winked, Principal Nizu had granted a special proctor-observed makeup exam. Izuku would take the practical test alone in one of the auxiliary battle centers. It was unprecedented, but so was the situation. You earned your place at that starting line, my boy, All Might's projection said, his smile softening. Now go and claim it. But be warned. The hero's expression turned serious. We don't know how the power will manifest. We don't know what will happen when you try to use it. Be careful. This is not a test of strength. It is a test of control. The projection fizzled out, leaving Izuku in the quiet of his room, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Control. He had none. He hadn't even dared to try tapping into the power, terrified of what he might unleash. Every time he focused on the thrumming energy within, he felt a corresponding flicker of that primal, feral instinct from the beach, a snarl rising in his throat, a tension in his shoulders like a predator about to spring. He instinctively recoiled from it every time, slamming a mental door shut on the feeling. Battle Center Gamma was a sprawling, concrete metropolis, a perfect replica of a modern city district designed for destruction. The sun beat down on the empty streets, creating a heat haze that shimmered off the asphalt. Izuku stood at the massive entrance gates, alone. His new tracksuit felt loose, and his stomach was a churning knot of nerves. High above in an observation room, a panel of judges watched on a series of monitors. Present Mike, Cementos, Midnight, and at the center, the stoic, tired-looking figure of Shota Aizawa, also known as the pro-hero Eraserhead. Beside him, sipping from a delicate teacup, was Principal Nizu. So this is the boy, All Might's special recommendation? Aizawa grumbled, his eyes narrowed on the screen showing a close-up of Izuku. Looks like a bundle of nerves. What's his quirk? The file is practically empty. Says Quirkless with a redacted addendum about a genetic anomaly. Patience, Aizawa, Nizu said, his black eyes glinting with an unnerving intelligence. All Might was very insistent. He described the boy's potential as unquantifiable. I find that far more intriguing than any standard power set. In the arena, a klaxon blared, the sound echoing off the empty buildings. Start! Present Mick's voice boomed from hidden speakers. The massive gates slid open. Izuku took a deep, shuddering breath and ran inside. The silence of the empty city was more unnerving than any crowd. It was a hunting ground, and he was the only prey. His amplified senses went into overdrive. He could hear the hum of the electricity in the streetlights, the creak of metal high up on a skyscraper as it expanded in the heat, the scuttling of a single cockroach in a sewer grate a block away. It was too much. It was disorienting. He rounded a corner and saw his first opponent. A one-point villain bot, a sleek, green machine with a single red optical sensor, rolled towards him on heavy treads. It was fast. OK. Just like All Might said. Clench my butt cheeks and yell smash from the bottom of my heart. He drew his arm back, focusing on that wellspring of power inside him. He tried to draw it up, to channel it into his fist. The thrumming intensified, a roar of energy flooding his limb, but with it came the other thing. The feral surge. He felt the phantom sensation of his skin hardening, his knuckles elongating. A wave of raw, bloodthirsty aggression washed over him, the desire not just to break the machine, but to tear it apart, to feel its metal shell rend under his claws. He gasped and pulled back, stumbling away. The power receded, leaving his arm tingling and numb. He had felt the change beginning, and the terror of it was absolute. The one-pointer closed the distance, its mechanical arm swiping at him. Izuku yelped and dodged, scrambling away like a startled rabbit. In the observation room, Aizawa grunted. What was that? He hesitated. He's got no killer instinct. He'll be washed out in the first 5 minutes. Nizu just took another sip of tea, his whiskers twitching. Or perhaps, he has too much. The next 10 minutes were a humiliating display of failure. Izuku ran. He encountered bots of all sizes, 2-pointers, 3-pointers, and every single time, the same thing happened. He tried to summon one for all, the feral transformation would begin to manifest, and he would instinctively choke it off, terrified of what he might become. He was a coward, paralyzed by the beast lurking within his own skin. He dodged and weaved, using the agility he'd gained from his training to stay one step ahead of the machines, but he hadn't scored a single point. His heart was a frantic drum of failure. Useless. It's happening all over again. I have all this power, and I'm still useless. I'm still just Deku, He skidded to a halt in the central plaza, panting, sweat stinging his eyes. He was surrounded. 3 2-pointers and a hulking 3-pointer blocked the exits. He was trapped. The bots closed in, their red eyes glowing with mechanical menace. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. Not a subtle vibration, but a deep, earth-shaking tremor. A shadow fell over the plaza, vast and absolute. Izuku looked up, and his blood ran cold. Towering over the buildings, its massive form eclipsing the sun, was the zero-pointer. It was a Goliath of steel and rivets, a walking skyscraper that made the other bots look like toys. Its head, a massive block of crimson metal, swiveled, its optical sensors scanning the cityscape. Target acquired! Its voice boomed, a synthetic sound that vibrated in Izuku's very bones. That's the gimmick bot, Aizawa said, leaning forward. The obstacle. Any sensible applicant runs away. On the screen, Izuku was doing just that. He turned and fled, the primal, self-preservation instinct overriding everything else. Run. Get away. That thing is death. He sprinted down a side street, his lungs burning. He risked a glance over his shoulder. The zero-pointer was moving, its massive arms swinging down. It wasn't targeting him. It was aiming for a different section of the street. His enhanced hearing picked up a faint sound from that direction, lost under the roar of the giant robot, a small cry of pain. His head snapped around. Lying on the ground, half buried under a pile of rubble from a collapsing wall, was a girl. She had short brown hair and was wearing a standard UE tracksuit. A proctor? An actor playing a civilian? It didn't matter. Someone was trapped. The zero-pointer's colossal fist descended, a meteor of green and chrome aimed directly at her. Time seemed to slow down. The image was burned into Izuku's mind, the girl's wide, terrified eyes, the descending shadow, the dust and debris rising around her. In the observation room, Nisa set his teacup down with a soft click. There it is, he whispered. In that instant, every fear, every doubt, every ounce of self-preservation in Izuku's body was incinerated by a singular, supernova-bright impulse. It was the same feeling he'd had at the sludge villain incident, but 1,000 times more potent, now supercharged by the ocean of power within him. It was a heroic impulse so pure, and so absolute that it left no room for thought. She needs to be saved. The mental door he had been slamming shut on the beast inside him was not just opened, it was kicked off its hinges, obliterated. He didn't just accept the feral surge, he welcomed it, embraced it, poured his entire desperate will into it. He needed power. All of it. Now, he crouched, coiling his body like a spring, and pushed off the ground. He didn't just jump. He exploded upwards, the pavement cracking under the force of his departure. He shot into the air like a green cannonball, aimed directly at the face of the mechanical god, and he transformed. It was not a clean or noble change. It was a grotesque, violent, biological cataclysm. As one for all, 100% of it, surged through his right arm, it ignited his Chimera genes in a chain reaction of uncontrolled adaptation. His arms swelled, muscles twisting and knotting into unnatural, fibrous cords. His skin, stretched taut, began to ripple and change. Patches of it darkened, thickening and hardening into an iridescent, chitinous shell like that of a beetle. Other areas grew rough and bumpy, the texture of a toad's hide. His shoulder joint popped and cracked, reseating itself in a broader, more powerful configuration. His hand was the epicenter of the horror. His fingers elongated, the joints cracking audibly as they reshaped. His nails thickened and sharpened, darkening into obsidian-black claws that curved into cruel, tearing talons. The very bones of his arm groaned under the strain, thickening and reinforcing themselves on the fly. It was a chaotic, nightmarish fusion of a dozen different creatures, insect, reptile, mammal, all melded into one monstrous limb of pure destructive potential. The transformation shot up his neck and into his face. His jaw unhinged slightly, his teeth grinding as his canines sharpened into fangs. A guttural, inhuman sound started deep in his chest, a sound of pure, unbridled predatory rage. He drew back his monstrous arm, the air around it crackling with green-black bioelectricity. He was no longer Izuku Midoriya. He was a force of nature. He was vengeance. He was instinct. From his throat, a word tore out, but it was not his voice. It was a sound scraped raw from the throat of a beast, a declaration of annihilation. Smeo Asash! The punch connected with the zero-pointer's faceplate. The impact was absolute. It wasn't just a punch, it was a biological singularity. The hardened carapace, the reinforced bone, the supercharged muscle, all driven by the full, untamed fury of One for All, delivered a level of kinetic energy that defied physics. The robot's head didn't just dent. It imploded. A shock wave of pure force radiated outwards from the point of impact, buckling and warping the metal of the entire chassis. The Goliath's single red eye flickered and died. The entire upper torso of the machine was vaporized in a spectacular explosion of shrapnel and sparks. The rest of its massive body, now headless and inert, froze for a moment before beginning a slow, grinding collapse. In the observation room, there was a stunned, dead silence. The proctors stared, wide-eyed, at the screen displaying the utter destruction. Aizawa was on his feet, his hand gripping the edge of the console, his knuckles white. Midnight had a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and awe. "My word!" Cementos breathed. Nisa's eyes were wide, sparkling with a terrifying, ecstatic glee. "Oh yes!" he chirped, his voice trembling with excitement. "Unquantifiable, indeed." For Izuku, the moment of impact was a silent, white-hot flash. The power discharged, and the backlash hit him with the force of a tidal wave. The first wave was from One for All. The chaotic energy, with no target left, recoiled up his arm. He felt every bone in the limb, from his newly formed claws to his reconfigured shoulder, shatter simultaneously. The sound was a wet, sickening crunch that he felt more than he heard. The second wave of backlash was from the forced detransformation. The Chimera genes, their catalyst violently ripped away, retreated. The carapace cracked and flaked away like old paint. The muscles deflated, the fibrous cords tearing and rupturing as they returned to their normal size. The skin split and bled. His claws receded, ripping the nail beds. It was the pain of a high-speed car crash compressed into a single, agonizing second. His arm was a mangled, useless ruin, a grotesque parody of a limb, glowing a sick purple and bent at multiple impossible angles. His legs, which had also partially transformed to power the jump, suffered the same fate. Both legs broke in multiple places, the bones snapping like twigs. He was falling. Plummeting from 100 feet in the air, a broken puppet with its strings cut. The adrenaline was fading, leaving only a universe of blinding, white-hot pain. His vision swam. The ground rushed up to meet him. "I'm going to die," he thought, a strange sense of déjà vu washing over him. But then, a sharp slap to his face. Not a physical one. It was the girl's voice, clear and panicked, from below. "Release!" He felt a sudden, strange weightlessness. His rapid descent slowed dramatically, his body gently floating as if he were in water. He looked down and saw the girl, her hand outstretched, one pinky finger raised. She had used her quirk to save him. He landed on the ground with the softest of thuds, the zero-gravity effect dissipating. He lay there, a broken mess on the cracked pavement. The pain was a living entity, a roaring fire that consumed his entire consciousness. But beneath the pain, something else was stirring. The beast, though wounded, was not gone. The remnants of the feral energy, combined with the agony, were pushing him into a cornered, defensive state. The klaxon blared again. "Time's up!" Footsteps approached. Fast. It was Present Mike, arriving on the scene to check on the applicants. "Hey, little listener! Are you whoa?" He stopped short, taking in the scene, the colossal, ruined zero-pointer, the cratered street, and the horrifically injured boy on the ground. As Present Mike reached for him, Izuku reacted. A low, vicious growl rumbled in his chest. He tried to push himself up on his one good arm, his eyes, wild with pain and residual primal energy, flashing a dangerous green. His lip curled back, baring his teeth in a completely unconscious, animalistic threat display. He wasn't Izuku Midoriya anymore. He was a wounded animal, ready to bite any hand that came near. Present Mike froze, his hand hovering. He was a pro. He recognized the signs of a person who was not in their right mind, who was a danger to themselves and others. "Whoa there, kid! Easy," he said, his voice losing its usual boisterousness, becoming low and calming. "Thank you." The voice was soft, coming from beside him. It was the girl. Uraraka. She was kneeling a few feet away, looking pale and nauseous from overusing her quirk, but her eyes were filled with sincere, profound gratitude. Thank you for saving me. That was amazing. The simple, human words cut through the red haze of pain and instinct like a beam of light. They were an anchor. They were the name of the boy he was supposed to be. Izuku. The growl died in his throat. The feral light in his eyes flickered and faded, replaced by the familiar, terrified green. The tension drained from his body, leaving him utterly limp, the full, crushing weight of his injuries crashing down on him. His consciousness dissolved into a black, painless void. The last thing he was aware of was the arrival of a tiny, elderly woman in a doctor's coat, who tooted disapprovingly at the sight of him. Goodness me, Recovery Girl said, looking from his mangled limbs to the destroyed robot and back again. What in the world did this boy do? These breaks, they're complicated. The tissue damage is non-standard. She leaned down and gave his forehead a gentle kiss. A wave of amplified healing energy washed over him, and his body immediately began the agonizing process of knitting itself back together. Up in the observation room, Aizawa stared at the screen, his face a mask of grim contemplation. The boy had 0 villain points. And yet, he had shown a level of destructive power that rivaled All Might's. But it was uncontrolled, self-destructive, and monstrous. He had saved someone, yes, but he had lost himself in the process. He's a menace, Aizawa stated flatly. A walking natural disaster. His power is a danger to himself and everyone around him. He has no place at this school. Principal Nizu turned to him, his beady eyes gleaming. He was holding a small remote, and on the main screen, he replayed the moment Izuku had leaped to save the girl. Is that what you see, Aizawa? Nizu asked, his voice deceptively light. I see something quite different. I see a boy with a power so immense it threatens to consume him, a beast on the verge of breaking its cage. And yet, when faced with a person in need, his first and only instinct was to sacrifice everything, his body, his control, even his own humanity, to save them. He paused the hologram on Izuku's airborne, transforming figure. That is not the instinct of a monster, Nizu said, a wide, sharp-toothed smile spreading across his face. That is the instinct of a true hero, a deeply flawed, incredibly dangerous, and utterly fascinating one. And I, for one, cannot wait to see what he becomes. The results were posted a week later. Izuku opened his acceptance letter, his heart in his throat. He had 0 villain points. A failure. But then All Might's projection appeared, explaining the hidden metric of the exam, rescue points. For his selfless, unhesitating act of heroism in saving another applicant, he had been awarded 60 points, placing him firmly among the top candidates. He had gotten in. He had made it. But as he looked at his reflection in the dark screen of the hologram device, he saw the faint, phantom flicker of glowing green eyes staring back at him. He hadn't just passed the exam. He had put himself, and the beast he carried, squarely on the radar of UA High. The real test was about to begin. The first day at UA High felt like walking into a dream. The sheer scale of the building, the sunlight glinting off its iconic U-shaped towers, the murmur of excited students, it was everything Izuku had obsessed over for a decade. He walked through the massive gates, his new uniform crisp and unfamiliar, his heart a frantic, fluttering bird in his chest. He had made it. Against all odds, he was here. But the dream was tainted by a creeping, shadowy dread. His right arm, though fully healed thanks to Recovery Girl's quirk, felt foreign. He could still recall, with terrifying clarity, the sensation of his bones shattering, of his skin hardening and cracking. He kept flexing his fingers, half expecting to see claws sprout from the tips. The beast he had unleashed at the entrance exam was not gone. It was sleeping, a coiled serpent at the base of his spine, and the thrum of One for All was its constant, low lullaby. He was a bomb walking into a school for heroes, and he had no idea how to defuse himself. He found Class 1A, the door comically oversized. Taking a deep breath, he slid it open. The first 2 people he saw were the stern, blue-haired boy from the exam orientation and Kaken. Bakugo was already in his customary pose of arrogant disdain, his feet propped on his desk. The boy with glasses was chastising him for it. Don't you think that's disrespectful to the upperclassmen and the people who made these desks? The boy chopped the air with his hand. Like I care, Bakugo sneered. What middle school are you from, you stuck-up extra? Izuku tried to back away, hoping to go unnoticed, but the bespectacled boy spotted him. He marched over, his movements stiff and precise. Good morning, he announced. I am Tenya Ida, from Semi-Private Academy. I know, Izuku stammered. I'm Midoriya. It's nice to meet you, Midoriya. Ida's eyes widened. I must apologize. I misjudged you at the entrance exam. While I was focused on the parameters of the test, you grasped its true nature, that there was more at stake than just villain points. You were the superior candidate. I was wrong to have criticized you for muttering. Before Izuku could respond, a cheerful voice cut in. Oh, it's you! The plain-looking boy. He turned to see the girl with the brown hair, the one he had saved. Her face lit up with a warm, genuine smile. I'm so glad you got in, she said, bouncing on the balls of her feet. That punch was amazing. And thanks for saving me back there. It was so cool. Wham! Bam! She mimed a huge punch. Izuku's face erupted in a blush so intense he felt lightheaded. Her proximity, her cheerfulness, the memory of her face as the robot's fist descended, it was all too much. He devolved into a flustered, stammering mess. Her name was Achiko Uraraka, and her very presence was a reminder of the two extremes within him, the heroic impulse to save, and the monstrous power it had unleashed. If you're just here to make friends, then you can pack up your things and leave. The voice was a monotone, devoid of all energy, yet it cut through the classroom chatter like a razor. Everyone froze. Izuku looked towards the door. There, lying on the floor in a bright yellow sleeping bag, looking for all the world like a giant, exhausted caterpillar, was a man with tired, bloodshot eyes and a mess of long, black hair. It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down, the man said, unzipping the sleeping bag and climbing out. He was dressed in a simple black jumpsuit with a long, bandage-like scarf wrapped around his neck. Life is short. You're all too irrational. He stepped into the room, his gaze sweeping over the students. It was a heavy, analytical stare, as if he were sizing up livestock. Izuku felt a shiver run down his spine. This was their teacher. I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa, he said, his voice flat. Right. Let's get to it. He pulled a blue gym uniform from his sleeping bag. Put these on and meet me on the P grounds. There was no welcome ceremony, no orientation. Just a blunt command. As the students filed out to the locker rooms, Aizawa's tired eyes lingered on Izuku for a fraction of a second longer than anyone else. His expression was unreadable, but Izuku's hypersensitive instincts picked up on a clear, distinct vibe: hostility. Pure, undiluted animosity. Shota Aizawa was a man who prized logic and efficiency above all else. His entire life as an underground hero was built on it. You assess a threat, you identify its weaknesses, you neutralize it with minimal fuss and maximum effect. He applied the same ruthless logic to teaching. Every year, he expelled students he deemed to have zero potential. It wasn't cruelty. It was a pragmatic mercy, saving them from a future where their irrationality would get them or someone else killed. This year, he had a special problem. Izuku Midoriya. He'd reviewed the footage of the makeup exam a dozen times. He'd read the classified file, the one Nisa had unlocked for him, detailing the boy's quirkless diagnosis and the cryptic Chimera factor. He'd listened to All Might's vague but forceful recommendation. And he had come to a single, logical conclusion: the boy was a threat. He wasn't just a kid with a self-destructive quirk. Aizawa had seen plenty of those. They were reckless, but manageable. Midoriya was different. The transformation Aizawa had witnessed on the screen was not a quirk activation. It was a biological crisis. The power was not the boy's to command. It was a separate, hostile entity that wore him like a suit, used him, and broke him. The growl, the feral look in his eyes after he'd regained consciousness. Those were not the actions of a hero in training. They were the actions of a cornered animal. Aizawa saw a future of immense property damage, of unacceptable collateral risk. He saw a boy who would be a liability on any team, a time bomb that could detonate at any moment. And his job, his logical, rational duty, was to disarm that bomb before it ever reached the field. His plan for the day was simple: pushed the boy until he broke, proved to everyone, including the boy himself, that he was unfit, and expel him. It was the only rational thing to do. The students gathered on the field, clad in their new gym uniforms. A quirk apprehension test? Several of them exclaimed in unison. But what about the entrance ceremony? The orientation? Uraraka asked, looking concerned. If you're going to be heroes, you don't have time for frilly, pointless events, Aizawa said, his voice dripping with disdain. UA's selling point is how unrestricted its school traditions are. That's how I get to run my class my way. His eyes, dark and heavy-lidded, scanned the crowd of students before locking directly onto Izuku. The intensity of the stare made Izuku feel like he was being physically pinned to the spot. You've been doing these since junior high too, right? Physical fitness tests where you weren't allowed to use your quirks. This country still insists on pretending we're all created equal by prohibiting powers and public assessments. It's not rational. One day, the Ministry of Education will wake up. He tossed the softball to Bakugo. Bakugo, you finished first in the practical exam. What was your best softball throw in junior high? 67 meters. Bakugo grunted. Try it with your quirk. Bakugo grinned, a feral, competitive gleam in his eyes. He stepped into the throwing circle, stretched his arm, and with a guttural roar of "Dai!" he threw the ball. The throw was punctuated by a massive explosion from his palm, propelling the ball into the sky with a sonic boom. It flew a tiny speck, before landing far out of sight. Aizawa held up a device. It beeped. 705.2 meters! The class erupted in exclamations of awe. This was what it meant to be at UA. Know your own maximum, Aizawa said, his voice cutting through the excitement. It's the most rational way to form the foundation of a hero. His gaze flickered back to Izuku. It was a direct, pointed challenge. The tests began. The 50-meter dash. The standing long jump. The grip strength test. For most of the students, it was a chance to show off. Aoyama used his naval laser to propel himself. Tsuyu Ajiri, with her frog-like abilities, excelled in the long jump. Uraraka made her clothes and shoes weightless. For Izuku, it was a personal hell. He was strong, fast, and agile from his 10 months of training. His results were respectable, even good for a quirkless person. He placed solidly in the middle of the pack in the dash and the jump. But he could feel it, that ocean of power, throbbing just under the surface, begging to be used. And with every throb, he felt the beast stir. Every time he even considered tapping into one for all, a jolt of primal fear shot through him. He saw flashes of his arm twisting, felt the phantom pain of his bones shattering. He was terrified of that loss of control, of becoming that thing again. So he didn't use his quirk. He relied solely on the mundane, physical strength he had built with his own 2 hands. Aizawa watched, his expression unchanging, but inside, his theory was being confirmed. The boy was afraid of his own power. He couldn't control it, so he refused to use it. A broken tool is no tool at all. Finally, came the ball throw. It was Izuku's turn. He stepped into the circle, the soft ball feeling heavy and damning in his hand. This was it. This was the test where a single, explosive burst of power was the only path to a good score. He couldn't rely on his baseline strength here. He had to use it. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic hammering of his heart. Okay. Just a little bit. Not 100%. Maybe 5%? Just enough to pass. He drew his arm back, focusing, trying to pull just a tiny stream from the raging river of One for All. He felt the power begin to surge. Red-black veins of energy flickered across his skin. He felt the familiar, terrifying shift begin in his knuckles. And then, nothing. The power vanished. The thrumming receded. His arm felt normal. Empty. He threw the ball with all his might, but it was a purely physical throw. It landed with a pathetic puff of dust a mere 46 meters away. He stared at his hand, confused. What happened? I erased your quirk. Izuku spun around. Aizawa stood behind him, his black hair floating around his head as if underwater, his eyes glowing a menacing, ruby red. The bandages around his neck, now revealed to be a complex capture weapon, writhed like living snakes. That ridiculous entrance exam was completely irrational, Aizawa said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He strode forward, his glowing eyes never leaving Izuku's. A person who can't control their own power is a liability. You have no business being here. The floating hair and glowing eyes. Izuku's analytical mind, even in its state of panic, made the connection. He can erase quirks just by looking at them. The underground hero. Eraserhead, Aizawa grabbed Izuku's arm, his grip like iron, and pulled him close. His capture weapon snaked around Izuku, binding him. From what I saw, Aizawa hissed, his voice for Izuku's ears alone. You can't control your power, can you? You think you'll just break your body again, force someone else to heal you, and call it a day? You think that makes you a hero? His grip tightened. Let me tell you what you are, problem child. You are not a hero. You are not even a student. You are a rabid dog with a power you can't leash, and a rabid dog has no place in a society of heroes. It's a threat that must be put down. The words were brutal, clinical, and they struck Izuku with the force of a physical blow. Rabid dog. It was a step beyond stray mutt. It was a condemnation. You have zero potential, Aizawa stated, his eyes still glowing. Whoever believed in you, whoever sent you here, was a fool. I'm doing them and you a favor. He released Izuku, shoving him back toward the circle. I've returned your quirk. You have one more throw. Give it everything you've got. The unspoken threat was clear. Fail and you're gone. And if you score the lowest on the total assessment, you will be judged as having no potential and will be expelled immediately. Izuku stumbled back into the circle, his mind reeling. Expelled. Zero potential. Aizawa's words echoed Bakugo's, echoed the doctor's, echoed a decade of his own self-doubt. He was being cast out again. He was being told he wasn't good enough. His gaze fell on his classmates. Ida looked concerned. Uraraka looked worried. Bakugo looked smug, a cruel smirk playing on his lips, as if to say, see? I told you so. He looked at his hand, then back at Aizawa, whose hair had settled, his quirk deactivated. Desperation warred with terror in Izuku's heart. He had to do something. He couldn't fail. Not now, not after everything. He couldn't use 100%. That would mean another broken arm, another trip to Recovery Girl. That would prove Aizawa right. He would be expelled. He couldn't use 0%. He would get a pathetic score. He would come in last. He would be expelled. He was trapped. Any path he took led to failure. His mind raced, a frantic torrent of panic and despair. Think. Analyze. What did All Might say? What did I learn? He remembered the feeling of the power, that chaotic, violent surge. It wasn't a tool, it was a flood. Every time he opened the gates, the flood rushed out, destroying everything. But what if he didn't open the gates? What if he just opened a crack? A tiny, single point of failure crack? Control it, Aizawa's word echoed in his mind. But how do you control a hurricane? An idea sparked, born of desperation and the analytical habits of a lifetime. His mind raced through his hero notebooks, through 1,000 different quirks he'd analyzed. He didn't think about raw power, he thought about application. The transformation on the beach, at the exam, it was chaotic because he was just letting the power happen. He wasn't guiding it. The Chimera genes were just reacting, pulling from a grab bag of animal traits to meet the demand for power in the most destructive way possible. Tame it, Aizawa had warned. But maybe taming wasn't the answer. Not yet. Maybe the answer was directing it. He thought back to his meeting with Nisa after the exam. The principal, another Chimera, had spoken to him in his office. Your mind is your greatest asset, young Midoriya, Nisa had said, sipping his tea. Your instincts are a wild menagerie. Your conscious mind must become the zookeeper. Do not think of it as one beast. Think of it as a library of traits. You must learn to select the book you want, not pull the whole shelf down on top of yourself. A library of traits. A zookeeper. Don't meet overwhelming force with more force. Outsmart it. Izuku looked at the ball in his hand. He didn't need to obliterate it. He just needed to transfer kinetic energy. He needed a focused point of impact. Not a sledgehammer. A nail gun. He took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. He closed his eyes, shutting out the stares of his classmates, the oppressive presence of his teacher. He focused inward, on the thrumming river of one for all. But this time, he didn't just try to draw from it. He gave it a command. A specific, biological blueprint. He didn't think about a punch. He thought about the tensile strength of spider silk, the way it could hold immense force in a tiny thread. He thought about the biological marvel of the mantis shrimp, how it could concentrate all its power into a single, devastating point, creating a cavitation bubble with the sheer speed of its strike. Not the whole arm, he commanded himself. Not even the whole hand. He drew his arm back. He felt the familiar surge of power, the growl of the beast awakening. But this time, he didn't recoil. He focused his will, his entire consciousness, on a single point, the tip of his right index finger, asterisk all of it. Right here. A single point of failure. A controlled explosion, asterisk. He swung his arm forward. Red-black energy, instead of flooding his entire limb, streaked down his arm like lightning, converging in a blinding flash at his fingertip. For a split second, he didn't see his finger. He saw a biological piston, a perfectly reinforced point of impact. He released the ball. Crack boom. The sound was not the dull roar of his 100% smash. It was a sharp, clean, piercing crack, like a rifle shot. The ball rocketed away, a white comet leaving a vapor trail in its wake. It flew with even greater speed and precision than Bakugo's had, soaring high into the sky and disappearing. The backlash was immediate and agonizing. A jolt of blinding pain shot up his arm, but it was contained. His index finger, the single point that had channeled the entirety of that immense force, was shattered. It was broken in at least 3 places, swollen to twice its normal size, and glowing a horrifying, deep purple. The pain was immense, a sharp, stabbing agony that made him gasp. But his arm wasn't broken. His other fingers were fine. He hadn't transformed. He hadn't lost control. He stood there, panting, cradling his ruined finger, a triumphant, pain-filled grin stretching across his face. He had done it. He had controlled it. The class stared, slack-jawed. 705.3 meters, Aizawa said, his voice a flat monotone. But as Izuku turned to look at him, he saw something new in his teacher's eyes. The open hostility was gone, replaced by a flicker of grudging, analytical surprise. Aizawa's hair lifted, his eyes glowing red again for a split second, a subconscious reaction. He had expected a full-body explosion, or a complete failure. He had not expected this. He had not expected precision. The boy hadn't just powered through, he'd thought his way through. He had taken Aizawa's logical condemnation and thrown a brutally logical solution right back in his face. The problem child had just become interesting. Kaken, Izuku whispered, looking over at his childhood rival. Bakugo was frozen, his mouth slightly agape, his crimson eyes wide with disbelief. His mind was struggling to process what he had just seen. That power, it was real. It wasn't a trick. That pathetic, quirkless pebble in his path. Deku had a quirk. A monstrously powerful one. The smug smirk was gone, replaced by a complex cocktail of shock, fury, and a tiny, unfamiliar flicker of fear. DKU, you bastard! Bakugo roared, his hands starting to spark and pop. Tell me what's going on. What kind of trick is this? He lunged, explosions erupting from his palms. Before he could take 2 steps, he was entangled in Aizawa's capture weapon, his body wrapped tight. Stand down, Aizawa commanded, his eyes glowing red again, nullifying Bakugo's quirk. Stop making me use my quirk over and over. I have dry eye. He released Bakugo, who stood seething, his fists clenched. The rest of the tests were completed in a tense silence. Izuku did his best, his one good hand throbbing in time with his broken finger. Finally, Aizawa displayed the final results on a hologram. Izuku scanned the list frantically. He wasn't last. Thanks to his ball throw score, combined with his solid, if unspectacular, results in the other tests, he had placed second to last. The person at the bottom of the list was Minoru Mineta, the short boy whose quirk involved pulling sticky balls from his head. Mineta began to weep. "I'm going to be expelled, by the way," Aizawa said, his voice casual as he dismissed the hologram. "The whole expulsion thing was a logical deception." The class stared in stunned silence. "It was a rational falsehood to push you all to your limits," he finished, a wide, slightly terrifying grin spreading across his face. "Way out?" Most of the class screamed. Momo Yayorozu, a tall, confident girl, simply sighed. "Of course it was a lie. It should have been obvious." Aizawa handed Izuku a slip of paper. "Go to the nurse's office. Get that finger healed." He then turned to the rest of the class. "Your curriculum sheets are in the classroom. We're done here." He walked away, leaving a class of stunned, relieved, and utterly exhausted students. As Izuku walked towards the nurse's office, cradling his broken finger, Uraraka and Ida caught up with him. "Is your finger okay?" Uraraka asked, her face etched with concern. "That was an incredible display of calculated risk, Midoriya," Ida added, though he still looked concerned about the self-injury. Izuku just smiled, the pain in his finger a dull throb compared to the soaring sense of accomplishment in his chest. He had faced down his fear, stared into the eyes of the beast, and for the first time, he had forced it to obey his will. As he walked, he passed Aizawa, who was leaning against the wall, seemingly observing the students. Aizawa didn't look at him, but he spoke, his voice low. "You have a beast on a leash, problem child," he said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "A very flimsy, frayed leash. Today you taught it one trick. That doesn't mean it's tame." He finally turned his head, his dark eyes locking with Izuku's. The look was no longer hostile, but it was far from friendly. It was the look of a seasoned bomb disposal expert appraising a device he had just successfully disarmed, knowing full well he would have to do it again tomorrow. "The moment it breaks free," Aizawa warned, his voice a chilling promise, "your career is over. Tame it. That's not a suggestion. It's your only path forward." Izuku nodded, the weight of the warning settling deep in his bones. He knew Aizawa was right. He had won a single battle in what was going to be a long, brutal war for control of his own body and soul. But for the first time, he felt like it was a war he might actually be able to win.